Welcome everyone to Real Talk with Ms. Val. My name is Gloria Coe and I serve as the Senior Director of Alumni Career Engagement. On behalf of UCLA Alumni Affairs, we welcome you to today's event. Real Talk with Ms. Val is made possible by the support of our sustaining donors. We want to thank those of you who have made a donation to keep our programs going throughout the year. Your UCLA Alumni Association is committed to strengthening the Bruin community with programs like this. For some housekeeping, if you have a question for Ms. Val or Dr. Parham, please use the Q&A function below instead of the chat. We also will be recording today's session for future viewings. The UCLA Alumni Association seeks to bring together our amazing alumni and friends to help us navigate complicated and interesting topics. The Real Talk with Ms. Val series features guests that can answer some of our burning questions on topics such as navigating your career journey and finding balance. For today's event, Ms. Val will interview Professor and licensed psychologist Dr. Bill Parham. Many of you submitted questions prior to the event, so we will answer some of your questions throughout the program. So now I will introduce our two speakers today. Ms. Val is the former head coach of the UCLA women's gymnastics team, a position she held for 29 years, which she led her teams to 7 NCAA championship titles until her retirement in June 2019. In 2018, she published her first book, an inspirational work called Life is Short, Don't Wait to Dance. Today, Ms. Val will be interviewing her friend and someone that has been a mentor for her for over 30 years, Dr. Bill Parham. Dr. Parham is a professor in the counseling program and the interim director of the Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership for Social Justice in the School of Education at Loyola Marymount University. He is a licensed psychologist, board certified by the American Board of Professional Psychology, and is past president of the Society of Counseling Psychology of the American Psychological Association. For most of his professional career, Dr. Parham has focused on working with athletes across all levels in sports. He has also worked with performance artists in drama, theater, and music. Currently, he serves as the director of the Mental Health and Wellness Program of the National Basketball Association. In addition, Dr. Parham is a member of the Mental Health and Wellness Task Force of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and a member of the Mental Health and Wellness Think Tank of the International Society of Sport Psychology. Dr. Parham's emphasis on personal empowerment, discovering and cultivating innate talents, and looking for hidden opportunities in every situation are trademark to his practice. I'll turn it over to Val, Ms. Val now, to start the interview.
Thank you so much. Bruins, thank you for joining us. I cannot wait until we all can be together on campus and hug it out and cry it out and just be with each other. Every time I do one of these webinars with all of you, I just get so excited because I feel I'm with family. And I am super, super excited to ask Dr. Parham to join us because he truly is my family. I've worked with Dr. Parham for about 35 years. He was head of the Student Psychological Services at UCLA for many years. And then he went on to do other things. But through it all, we've maintained a very close mentorship and friendship. And so, I mean, like, seriously, could you pause a second? How fortunate am I to be able to say that my two biggest mentors in my life that became my friends and my family were Coach John Wooden and Dr. Bill Parham. So, Dr. P, thanks for being here.
What a blessing. It's an honor. Thank you for the invitation. Happy New Year to you and Happy New Year to a Bruin Nation. It is unprecedented. It is, again, a word that's been used so often. But I also want to say what's unprecedented is your leadership and genius that you've exhibited as survivors of this drama. And we'll talk more about that. But thank you for the invitation and glad to be here and glad to contribute to the conversation.
So Dr. P, you and I were having a trip down memory lane 2 days ago when we were preparing for this. And we literally have been through you helping our team come through the 80s when Magic Johnson was diagnosed with AIDS and everybody was freaking out, not knowing how to handle it. You helped us with that. You helped us in the 90s, the early 90s, when I became the head coach and I had no idea what I was doing and floundered. And you helped me substantially through that. You helped our team through 9/11. You helped our team and myself and our staff when I went through the year of breast cancer and chemotherapy and surgeries. last year while I was not the head coach because I had retired, but we had a situation with one of our student athletes, a gymnast, who was so fearful of flying, and they'd gotten to the airport. They were going up Stanford, and she was having a panic attack. And Chris Waller, the current head coach, called you, and that quickly, Dr. Parham and our team had a team meeting in the airport.
In the airport, yeah.
And I don't know what you said to her, but it was amazing because you got her on that plane and she went. This was a week. That the important part of the story is that this was a week after, sadly, Kobe Bryant and the other 9 passengers were killed. And so that was fresh on their minds. And then just within the last 10 months, you and I have had probably more conversations these last 10 months than we've had in the last few years with the pandemic, with Black Lives Matter, how to speak with our student athletes about that. And with all of the things that have been going through this. And one thing that has been, I want you to know, one thing that has been extremely comforting for me, and I hope it will be for all of you listening as well, but this is something that I share with people who share with me their anxiety and stress, is that you've said over and over that every single person on this planet is affected by this pandemic negatively. Even if you're Jeff Bezos making $1 gazillion off of Amazon because of it, you're still affected negatively. And because of that, the heightened sense of all of our emotions, that is, I don't know why, that just brought me comfort that we truly are all in this together.
Yes. Yeah. Without question, we really are all in this together. And we, as they say, we are all in the same boat. It's important to realize that. And somehow, if you can wrap your head around that in your arms, literally and figuratively, you get a sense of not feeling so alone. Because when you don't do that, you in fact feel alone. And aloneness is the exact portal some people don't need to open. Because that's when everything comes flooding that they don't want to talk about. And they spent much of their lives, both as students, as professionals, as whatever it is they do, because that's what they were drawn to do. But in part, it serves as a way of keeping down and keeping the lid on stuff you don't want to talk about. But when you are sort of forced in confinement and forced to be by yourself, those personal safeguards that have worked all those years and the options you've had to escape momentarily are no longer there, that can be a real trap. And so really embracing each other with every opportunity that presents itself is an antidote to moving forward. So yeah, we are is together, and we need to realize that there's more common that we have than not common.
One thing that I've always appreciated about you, and I really started understanding why I appreciated it so much when I started reading more leadership books and coaching books and all of that, is that there always seems to be a little gimmick, like the 7 ways that you can wake up tomorrow happy, the 11 ways that you can,
Right.
And I've always realized that anything that is truthful has been passed down since the dawn of man.
Correct.
And the one I'm telling Bruins, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you this. Guys know I was at UCLA 37 years. I'm still very much in touch with our alumni. I'm going to say 9 out of 10 conversations I have with our alumni, they will mention something, a quote or something that they learned from Dr. Parham. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I feel it sticks with people is because it is truthful. It's not a gimmick. It's not like you're trying out there selling your book or anything. And the second reason is because you're very clear. And so Bruins, put your seatbelts on, okay? Put your emotional seatbelts on, because you may be some hearing things that are going to hit a little hard.
Yeah.
But clear is kind. And Dr. Parham never disrespects anyone, but I'm speaking for myself. He never disrespected me, our staff, or our student athletes by soft pedaling anything. And that combination of the truths and the clarity is really what has stuck with myself and our student athletes all of these years. So I'm going to start off with something that I remember hearing you say many, 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 many times. And I feel like it's going to hit home with a lot of us right now. Take a deep breath, Bruins. Ready? Okay, let it out. Here we go. Dr. P, I've heard you say that life doesn't happen to us. Life happens for us. But right now, it certainly feels like it's happening to us. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And again, going back over memory lane with you for 30 years, it's hard to believe that it has passed so quickly, but I will get to that so quickly piece later. But yeah, it really does feel that life happens to us because in part, that's how we're socialized. Stuff happens, as they say, shit happens. And a lot of times it happens right when you don't need it. And sometimes it comes in such volumes. You get depressed, you get anxious, you don't want to get up and engage. You go, okay, what next? And then there's all this why me. And so the first thing I always want to do is to acknowledge that that's a legitimate feeling. What the hell's going on here? And it's a legitimate question to ask. And if you get stuck in that question and the why me, you're going to be in a revolving door the rest of your life and spiral into depressions or chronic anxieties or who knows what. Because when you ask that question, you're not going to get the answer. And that's going to increase frustrations. I long since learned that if you ask, well, maybe life feels like it's happening to me, but what if it's happening for me? That invites a different consideration. Because all of you on this Zoom, I don't know any of you but one person who's identified himself. And what's up? How you doing, Jeff? But I'd be willing to bet my professional reputation that all of you have a story to tell, that all of you were feeling like you were buried at some point in your life with stuff. But my question is, were you buried or were you planted? And have you now grown and matured and benefited from the very thing that was happening to you? I tell my students, I said, I will have the university professor sign your diploma today if you can just give me one example, not two, just one, of a situation where you didn't find a treasure in every trial. So again, I think what I want you to hear is it feels legitimate, like life sucks and life happens to you. Life happens to you all the time and it feels crappy. And when you throw in gender, when you throw in race, when you throw in socioeconomic status, when you throw in a lot of contextual parameters, it really does exponentially make that feeling worse. In some communities where it's generationally passed down, that's when you feel like their curse is with you. So again, I get that, and I always want to acknowledge it and never want to dissuade people from thinking in those ways. My approach has always been to be additive. Okay, that's one way to look at it. But again, what if life is happening for you? And at some point, you're going to come out of this thinking, that's why that happened. Again, have you been buried or planted? And are you now blooming? And right when you bury something, you don't see the seed pop up just like that. You have to water it. You have to tend to the soil. You have to rely on the sunshine, and pretty soon you're bearing fruit. And that's the cycle of life. But that again gets into hope, understanding, looking at a bigger picture. And stop getting wrapped up in yourself. That's part of the issue. When people get so wrapped up in themselves and in fact, it's been said, people get all wrapped up in themselves, make the smallest packages, actually. So get out of your own way, acknowledge that it feels like it feels, but invite yourself to say, is there a different way to look at that? Because perspective is what counts in the game. So I'm talking too much. I can go on and on, but hopefully that got to your question.
Talking about the game, your background is gorgeous. It's a golf course, yes?
Yes,
And
it
are you
is a golf course. Yes.
Are you in Hawaii?
I'd love to be, what you're looking at now is my headset and my mind space. That's where I'd like to be. I'm actually in Los Angeles, wishing I was there on that golf course. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And why? Why that?
Well, it really, I have it up there as a screen because there's really more symbolic meaning to it. And there's for two reasons. For those of you who do golf, and for those of you who don't, the idea is to get around 18 holes with the least amount of strokes. And every golf course has 6 lures or traps: the water, sand, rough, out of bounds. The beauty and the aesthetics of the course is 5. And the 6th is the headspace and the negative headspace that we have. Every golf course has those 6 distractions. So novice golfer gets on the tee and in a very meditative state, closes their eyes and says 2 or 3 times quietly, I don't want to hit it in the water, sand, rough, or out of bounds. I don't want to hit it in the water, sand, rough, or out of bounds. You take a deep breath and let it out. Pull back to swing it. Beautiful swing, gorgeous. And 90% of the time, the ball ends up right where they say they didn't want it to go. See, because we've learned that the brain doesn't pick up, I don't want to hit it in the brain doesn't hear that. The brain hears targets. So that's why it lands in the target area. So we teach novice golfers, instead of saying, I don't want to hit it in the water, sand, rough, or out of bounds, we ask and tell them to suggest to themselves, I want to hit it in the middle of the fairway. The very second it lands in the middle of the fairway, which it does 90% of the time, by definition of its current location, it didn't land in the water, sand, rough, or out of bounds. So it's a reminder for me to not put into my language and self-talk where I don't want to go. I put in my language and self-talk where I do want to go. And I focus on that, and I'm real clear about it. The other part that reminds me on this is I ask a lot of the audience and my students, are you looking at a sunrise and a sunset? So I'll entertain that for a few minutes and take roll. And usually it's 50-50. Some people can't make up their mind. And then when I say that they're both incorrect, there's a big gasp. What do you mean? And I said, well, the fundamental assumption is that the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west. And we've all been told that, and we believe that. But the truth is something you were told back in the 4th grade, that the sun, in fact, never moves. What's moving, in fact, is the earth around its own axis and around the sun, creating an illusion that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. See, the truth of the matter, the sun never moves. And because you don't see it at midnight or in the deepest, darkest storm doesn't mean it's not there. It simply means, and only means, you can't see it. So I use that because I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody talk about, I've lost my confidence. I've lost my motivation, self-esteem, and willpower. And anybody that knows me, I'll say, oh yeah, I hear you, I get it. And I'll tease them, and I say, where'd you lose it? Can you find it? And ultimately, I get to the point of suggesting, just so they consider. In fact, my phrase is, I'll invite you to consider, because I have zero investment in having any of my students or audience believe in anything I say. But I do promise you 100% of what I say is gospel truth. Not my truth, it's just truth. See, the facts is, the facts are the sun doesn't rise and set. It never does. And when people say they lost confidence, motivation, et cetera, that sunrise, sunset thinking that we as psychologists have brainwashed you to believe, it's utter nonsense. I think we're born with everything that you need, and life is about discovering that. But go ahead, Ms. Val.
I am just cracking up. Oh my gosh, I'm seeing all of our poor little gymnast faces over the years.
Yeah.
when you tell them, I'm going to give you a few minutes, get on your phones and go tell me what time is the sun going to set tonight. And they're like totally bought in, hook, line, and sinker. And
Yeah.
then you ask them something about their confidence and say, well, I lost my confidence. And you're like, where'd it go? And it's like, oh my gosh, year after year after year. And then you see the seniors who have been with it for a while just cracking up
Yeah.
inside.
Right.
It's truth. Like I said, it's not your truth. It is simply truth.
It is truth. And it really gets into another practice that I engage in and I often recommend is really self-reflection. Because I think the answers to a lot of questions that we have are right in front of us. And for me, it's out here in the environment. It's not often in a book. It's there. It's talking to people, friends, mentors. All of that is true. But another source of being still. And what I often teach my students is that whole process of stillness. And in fact, it reminds me one of the things I talk to the gymnasts about. I said, one of the biggest talents we all have is that ability to listen. And I have them spell out the word listen. And I said, if you stare at those 6 letters, hidden in those 6 letters is the absolute key to maximize what that word spells. Then they scratch their head and look puzzled. And what are you talking about? And I said, well, if you move those letters around, you come up with the word silent. See, the best way to listen is to be silent, not only to others, but to yourself. Because the answers that you seek are not external to you. The answers you seek to every question you ask is already inside of you. You just have to provide the portal for it to come out and surface. And part of opening that portal is asking yourself, are you really wanting to do that? Because quite frankly, many people aren't. They want to hold on to their stuff and not let it go, which is an okay thing to do, but call it for what it is.
I love that. I use the silent and listen thing all the time. I use it on every single speech, and I give you credit for it, right? On every single speech I do. I want to say thank you to the Bruins for the questions that you have sent in.
Wow. Yeah.
I love these. I wish that we could get to all of them because I really do appreciate and respect your time, the time that it took for you to write them and opening your hearts to us. And we do want to speak to the things that are important to you. But as you well know, we can't get to every question. So Dr. Parr and I looked over these, and there are a few different groups that most of these questions can be put into. And the first group has to do with coping and how we are coping during this time. And I just want to read just a few of them. Nicole Gertzen-Tang writes that she's spiraling. She's job hunting is not progressing, feeling being stuck and not performing. And how would you suggest one get out of the thought process and reframe basically getting unstuck? Timothy Dallinger says, what are the best things we can do to help and support our spouses that are suffering from anxiety and depression as a result of these difficult times we're presently in? Megan Jelinek had a similar question about her family. And so the question, Dr. P, is how can we, like, what is that magic thing that we can think about to get unstuck? I feel like it is friggin' Groundhog Day. And it's driving me crazy. And I've shared this before on these webinars that I do wake up with a sense of sadness. And it makes me deliberately, intentionally, first of all, focusing on gratitude. But then usually by the end of the day, I'm unstuck. So can you speak to stuck and unstuck for us, please?
Yeah, I can. One of the things I really want to comment on is that I think it is important to always, again, acknowledge that that's how people are legitimately feeling, that they're stuck. And there's a lot of reasons for that, both contemporary and historic experiences. I always go on record as saying that every story has a person, but every person has a story. I couple that with always asking people, when I hear you say that you are stuck, is there something that is sticking you, or are you holding on to something? Then they scratch the side of the head and they go, well, never thought of it like that. And when we're talking about interpersonal struggles and intrapersonal struggles, which are internal, absolutely at no point in life is anything external to you sticking to you. It feels like that. So again, I want to acknowledge that. But I also go on record as saying the past does not hold on to you, you hold on to it. And I supplement that by saying there's only one reason, not two, not three, one, that people hold on to stuff, because there is a benefit or a payoff, period. And so when I hear people say they're feeling stuck, I immediately say, okay, what is it that they've been holding on to, and for what's the payoff and the benefit? And acknowledging that finally, in reconciling that, bringing some resolution to that, often frees up energy to think more freely and differently. This person who mentioned, I'm stuck in this career search. Well, what is it that you are doing to keep yourself stuck? I would ask. Again, I would acknowledge that that's how you feel. It's frustrating. It's probably pulling your hair out now, thinking that, gosh, she's not answering my question. But what I am inviting you to do is to hear, I'd be willing to bet that there's something other than the career struggle that's bugging you. I don't even know who you are, but I'd be willing to bet my professional reputation. And whatever that thing is, spending some time working on that, not necessarily through that as a prerequisite to moving on, but acknowledging that. And in fact, I go on record as also saying there's a famous study that came out years ago, 1996 and 1998 to be specific. And it was a big study, meaning 18,000 patients, with the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta and the Kaiser Permanente Medical Group. And they did a big study called the ACE study, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Big study, one of the key findings. For each one of you on this screen, and I understand there's up to 500 people, if each of you right now went into your phone directory and randomly selected 100 people, what the data are telling us that 65 out of 100 of those people have had from 1 to 3 adverse childhood experiences, the earliest of which commonly would have occurred before the age of 10 years of age. So my guess is part of what's getting somebody stuck in the moment, in the present, might be the frustrations, might be COVID, might be the lack of whatever. Maybe you need to get your resume done up right. I mean, it could be those things. But when I go and add the intrapersonal component to that, there's always a fear, there's always a self-protective nature, stance that one is taking that's really holding them from really blossoming into the genius that they really are innately gifted to be. And the older you get and the more comfort you achieve with money, fame, fortune, we begin to rest on our laurels and to say, well, why do I need to dig up all that stuff in the first place if I'm doing okay overall? And so you basically are incentivized to keep the lid on it until the lid pops off, such as in COVID times or these others. So feeling stuck is legitimate, but I think there's a part that we contribute to our own stuckness. And the only control that we have over responding to life's challenges is to exercise that which we can control. And how we think about what's going on with us, how we feel about it, and how we behave are the only tools at our disposal. And we're here to be real honest and say, maybe it's not the career search that's keeping me stuck. Maybe it's something else. I think that might free your energy up. Sort of the last analogy I'll say. If all of you listening to this podcast now, this webinar, sitting in your homes or offices, if the smoke detector went off on the ceiling right now, I doubt that all of you would stay here calmly and listen to me talk and Ms. Val ask questions. I secondly doubt that were you to get up and go check it out, that you would take the smoke detector down from the ceiling and go get it fixed. When the smoke detector goes off, it suggests that it's working, not that it's not working. And so when I see people who are stuck, who are frustrated, who are acting in ways that are different than their norm, for me, that's their proverbial smoke detector going off, indicating that there's something else going on in their life that merits investigation and examination. And that something else is not what is triggering you right now. That's absolutely always true. So find how you are participating and where you're stuck and where you're not stuck, that I think is a big key. And you will always succeed at finding the answer.
Okay, so you mentioned the past does not hold on to you, you hold on to the past.
Yes.
I am guilty of. So in order to move forward, we still have to address whatever we're holding on to. Yes?
Yes. Yes.
And what is the best way to do that?
But see, you have to decide that that's what you really want to do. See, one of the things I've been doing in most of my career is in private practice for 30 years. Seen a lot of different patients. But it came to my attention early in my practice that there are three kinds of patients that I have seen. Not diagnostic impressions, but three categories. There are those patients who come in who really, really, truly want to get better. And those are the people who at some point, probably 20 to 30 minutes in, I get a feeling that they are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they legitimately want to do something different than what they've done. That's about a third of the people that I've seen and with whom have reported some success. There's two other categories of people who come in. One is a person who wants you to simply be a witness to their pain. Oh my God, life is sucks. And the next week they come in, oh, Dr. P, you thought that was bad. You should have seen what happened to me this week. And they go on and on and on. And I've learned that those people are not really wanting to get better. They're wanting to witness to their pain. So I've had to make decisions. I really want to be a witness to their pain. And at some point I don't, because it's colluding with them being stuck and not developing themselves. And I don't choose to do that. But if they want to do that, I can refer them to a colleague who might be willing to engage in that. The third category of the person is a person who just wants an understanding of their issue. I'm always in and out of relationships. I just want to understand why. I can't seem to do X, Y, Z. I just want to understand why. I've learned people who want an understanding don't want to get better. They literally just want an understanding. And once they have that light bulb, oh, that's why. That's their last session. And they're not going to come back until they want more understanding. So I say all that to say is that you have to be real honest with yourself. Do you really want to change? And some people, quite frankly, don't, because they're comfortable in doing what they're doing. And when they look at their economics, their, all the acquisitions that sort of make them who they are, they look and say, well, I haven't done so badly. So sometimes they don't want to change. The other reason they don't want to change is that changing brings on a huge responsibility that they don't feel at the moment that they are ready to handle. I doubt, Ms. Val, when you started and took over as head coach, that you knew 30 years later you would be the John Wooden of women's gymnastics and have 7 national championships. As I recall, if I can disclose this, I heard you say many times in those early years, well, I'm a dancer, an elite dancer, but not a gymnast. Are you sure I can do this? And I kept saying, what are you talking about? What's that got to do with anything? And sure enough, you are a 7-time national champ, 7 times. A sacred number, by the way.
Yeah.
Because you pushed through and you were willing to risk being in the dark for a minute, but trusting that at some point you're going to come out at the other end. Surrounding yourself with people you trust. You've always had the notion that you rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies. They both add up to $1, but the quarter is 25 times more relevant than a penny. So you've always, in my opinion, surrounded yourself with people who you can trust, one of whom is not going to tell you what you want to hear. but you pushed yourself and you've discovered more of the genius, the innate genius that you were gifted with. And I think that is true of everybody listening on this screen. As successful as you are, you haven't yet scratched the surface of how brilliant you really are, in my opinion. And I don't even know who I'm talking to.
Okay, so to wrap this part up, because I've got 8,000 questions for you right now, but I'm just going to ask one. So feeling stuck, getting clarity, not holding on to the past, and all of that, what are some of the questions that I can ask myself without having to go into professional therapy? Which I love therapy. I love going, but right now, COVID, I'm staying home. So what can I say?
Right. Well, I think professional therapy is wonderful. And I think at most, it provides you with an objective ear, somebody who isn't contaminated with your life story and your biases and prejudices. But theoretically, once they factor in and filter through their own biases and prejudices, they can really hear you differently than you can hear yourself. And a well-trained therapist can give back to you what you are in fact telling them. And then when you have that information, you can make some decisions. And so I think therapy is useful, but it's not the thing you have to do in order to get better. I think part of getting better is really asking yourself, I wasn't born confused, depressed, anxious, with stress and trauma. So something happened to me. I don't know what it is, don't understand it, but there's something there. And the only way you're going to start getting at that stuff is stillness. And over time, it's not going to come all out at the same moment. But you have to be ongoingly open to that self-examination and exploration. Second, I think you have to really decide on a North Star goal. You've heard me say that a million times. It really is like the GPS in your car. If I told all of you on the screen, I want you to drive to Podunk, Missouri, and I need you to get there by Saturday. Once you start scratching your head and say, where the heck is Podunk, Missouri? But you plug it into the GPS in your car. Immediately, once you put the address and zip code, i.e. the coordinates, you're going to get 3 bits of information. A visual picture from point A to point B, where you're at now, where you're headed. Narrative text, turn right, turn left, whatever. And the third bit of information is the approximate amount of time it's going to take you to get there. Furthermore, once you get out on the road based on the GPS, let's say 10 hours into your journey on the road you're supposed to be on, there's a huge obstacle so big you can't pass on that road. With the minute you recalculate your GPS, that little voice comes on and says, recalculating route. And the question is, well, how does he or she calculate it so quickly when it didn't know, one, where the heck this obstacle came from? But see, at that moment, it knows exactly where you're going. And more importantly, exactly where you are at that moment. So having a North Star goal is part of getting yourself out there. Because if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. But you really got to look at that vision. Where do I really want to go? Really. And really lock into that vision. And once you can see that in your mind's eye, and you think about it and read about it and study about it, it becomes who you see in your lens, and what you see and what you receive as information are altered irreparably. But it does take a North Star vision. It does take a willingness to, it's been said that if you want to set sail, you have to untie yourself from the dock, and you got to untie yourself from the dock of all your past and woes. And at some level, maybe involve forgiveness, for example. But you untie yourself there, you get a North Star goal, and you really surround yourself with 4 quarters and not 100 pennies. Those are the ingredients for moving forward on your own terms, knowing that there's going to be ups and downs and challenges. But again, as all athletes know, and a lot of people know, it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to that which occurs. And we have 100% response. While we have little to no control over what happens, we have 100% control over how we respond to the challenges that the world presents. 100% control over our response. And that's what we need to focus on.
I love that. That is, again, truth. This is an interesting question, and I have no idea how you're going to answer this. Sarah Buchanan asks how to be mentally flexible depending on the elders or youngsters that you're in charge of, with how things are changing from 1 hour to the next. And her question is, how does she remain true to herself with all the changes that are happening? And the question is, must the switching be silent, or is it better to verbalize how you're feeling? And I feel like I can relate to that just from the frustrations of, as we started this by saying, all of us are emotionally heightened and emotionally charged. And a part of me just wants to crawl into a hole and wait till it's all over and not have to deal with anybody.
Yeah. That's a question that baits a lot of time that I know we don't have to answer, but let me try to sum it up as briefly as I can. And I'm not known to be brief, but I'll try to work on that. And let me do it by asking, sharing a story that it's actually true. It happened to me fairly recently in the midst of all this chaos. Certainly during the election, it was broadcast, even though Biden had won, that there were still 700 million people who voted for somebody else. And my colleague, who was a white male, was just beside himself that there is that level of hate and venom in the world. People who actually hate. That's a lot of people, 700 million. And they were upset. I mean, throwing up upset and can't get over this. And really coming unglued. And I certainly understood all of that. But in the midst of their confusion, they sort of look at me and said, well, why the F are you so calm? I said, well, I wasn't trying to be calm, but I said, I have a different experience of that. And I said, you are waking up to a reality that has been true for Black people for 500 years. This divisiveness that's arising now isn't just now arising, it's been here the whole time. See, something can't come to the surface if it's not already in existence. So this 700 million folks who come and hate, that's not a new statistic. That's one you are now acknowledging and realizing. But it's been there the whole time. So I didn't quite say I had a celebratory mood, but I was encouraged that the manifestation of this sort of venom, on top of the social protest stuff and the lynching of George Floyd and the contentious elections and all the stuff that is going on, the Black Lives Matter movement, the hashtag Me Too, all of that stuff. I think it's a wake-up call, and the globe, the universe, has witnessed everything we've been talking about here in America for years. I'm hopeful that it's going to change because of that. And I think we as America have put on center stage with all of this stuff that is going on. But it's not new. It's new to some people because they have had the privilege of not having to look at it, of not having that be part of their lived experience. But there are many other groups around who live those experiences on a day-to-day basis. So it continues to be frustrating, not because it's happening, but because nothing is being done to stop it. And that's where those angry feelings come up, and sense of disappointment and anguish, because this is a perpetual problem that will not go away, which I ended our conversation with this man. It's something I often believe. So one thing you may want to consider is that fundamental to your belief in your expression of sadness and grief is that America really has failed at ending racism. And now what's before you is a big job ahead of you. And I said, quite frankly, I don't share that view. I don't think America has failed at ending racism at all. I think America has succeeded at maintaining racism and sexism and ageism and ableism based on the systemic structures that are now in place to keep those systems operating in full force. So I think we come at it from very different fundamental assumptions and realities and experiences. And so part of getting a handle on where you're at is understanding what are the fundamental assumptions that are driving what it is you think you are seeing. Are you seeing something that's brand new, or are you discovering something that has been there all the time, but you've had the luxury of not having to look at it? And once you can begin to address those, what I consider as real questions, you begin to think differently, not necessarily come to a different conclusion, but to see something differently. I think it's just important to operate from many perspectives. I do. And that's just my opinion.
So in dealing with people who are home with children, at home with aging parents, which I know you're experiencing with your family, your wife, what is an outlet for the person that is the caregiver? What is the outlet for the person who is trying to get their children to do online schooling? What is their outlet to be able to say, I'm really frustrated and tired? Or should they just shut up, go to bed early, and wake up and have a new day?
No, I think shut up and going to bed early, I think is a big mistake in my opinion, because those feelings are real and they have to be discharged in some way. And if they aren't discharged in constructive ways, they're going to be discharged in destructive ways. In fact, what we've seen is as a result of COVID, we've seen an increase in abuse, child abuse, spousal abuse and battery, et cetera, calls to the suicide hotline. All of those things have increased because of that. So I think keeping things packed in and not acknowledging, I think, is a choice that we have, but I think it's not a wise one. Secondly, I think it is important to acknowledge the burden. Now that you have somebody at home, you have to be the teacher, and the teacher doesn't teach your kids. That's an extra chore you didn't sign up for, and you don't feel adequate enough to do. So it is stressful, it's a burden, it's tiresome, it's exhausting. And as you said, rightly, Ms. Val, it's Groundhog Day all over again. And that's tough, but at some point you really have to decide, is doing something for myself a luxury or a requirement for me sustaining myself? Far too many people go on vacations or go to the gym or do fitness or do whatever it is they do, learn how to cook or take a new language class. They feel very guilty and selfish because it's a deviation from staying on task. And I often say, well, that's a way to look at it. Another way, it's an investment in your own healing and development. And when you are feeling like you're advancing yourself, that you are comforted, that you are learning something new, that you are stretching yourself, that you are distancing yourself from the momentary burdens, all of that is healing. And so the takeaway here is, how do I reframe taking care of myself? Mm-hmm. Is it a luxury that I can't afford, or is it an investment in something that's going to help me sustain being a better parent and a wife, employee, et cetera?
Well, I want you to know that this is my Dr. Parham book, and I have had this book for 35 years and taken all of my Dr. P notes in it. And I was so thrilled to pull this back out. And the one thing that I remember is the very first thing that you taught us that really made me go, that I have shared with so many people. Can you see my little stick figures? Can you
I do, yes.
Figures?
Yeah.
You remember what this is all about?
I do, the tabula rasa notion.
The tabula rasa that we all learn in college, right?
Psych 101.
Psych 101, that we're born empty and we need to fill ourselves up. And how you explained your feelings about this, I think about quite a bit, because it makes me feel really good. And I hope that all of you listening just take a nice deep breath, because I think you're going to feel really good after Dr. P explains this.
Well, one of the things I've often believed in, again, tabula rasa is a notion that is advanced in Psych 101 classes, is a Descartes principle, is that when a child is born, it's a blank slate. which is what tabula rasa means. And the idea behind that is when you are a blank slate, then that blank slate interacts with essentially 6 systems of socialization. Their family, their parents first, their family, their community, the school systems, religious, faith-based practice, and then the media. So as a result of interacting with all of those 6 systems, the idea is to feed into this blank slate facts, figures, information in the hopes that they begin to fill up. And when they get to be about age 18, they have enough stuff in there to begin making adult decisions about career and relationships mostly. But the gist of that developmental theory is as you get to be 30 and 40 and 50 and 60, et cetera, you keep filling yourself up. I understand that, but I have always had at least 2 fundamental objections to it. If you really understand what I've suggested, when I really understood it, I need you to hear me on this. That theory promises you, not suggests, hints, promises you at no point in your life will you ever be full. At some point at every stage, there's an emptiness and a void that you have to come up to speed, fill in the gaps, plug up the void. So life has become one perpetual drive to prove yourself that you are in fact good enough for whatever it is you're doing. In my belief, clinically and otherwise, that's the number one reason people come to private practitioners and counselors. I'm not good enough. The second reason I always question that, because it assumes that fundamentally when you are born that you're empty and don't have anything of value. The third reason I've always questioned that is because when you really look at cultures around the world, they don't believe that for 1 minute. They in fact believe in parable of the seed, that the minute you are born, you are in fact innately gifted with all the talents and genius you can ever hope to possess. In that the same agents of socialization or systems, parents, family, community, schools, faith-based practice, and the media, when those systems embrace that entity that already has it, it stimulates to bring out of that entity that which it already possesses. So at each level, 20s, 30s, and 40s, you are in fact in complete possession of everything you need to solve the issues that you struggle with. I often tell my students, if this were an empty bottle, I don't know if you can see this on my screen, a full bottle, and I emptied it, and now the water is on the floor, and the bottle is now empty. If I ask them why is the floor is now wet, the number one answer, well, Dr. P, you poured the water on the floor. And while it's true, and that's what I did, that's not the answer. So then when somebody says, well, okay, now you're trying to trick us, and so it's gravity. I said, well, okay, gravity's there, but that's not the answer. You see, the only reason the floor is now wet is because there was water in here to come out in the first place. When you squeeze an orange, why is the orange juice coming out? Well, Dr. P, because you're squeezing it. No, that's not true. I am squeezing it, but it's coming out because there's juice in there to come out. So nothing can manifest and come out if it's not already there. So I always invite people to really at least entertain. Are you really as deficient as you believe in void and don't have something because somebody told you that? And you've taken it on because everybody else around you believes the same thing? Or are you innately gifted with talent and genius beyond measure that you might be afraid to discover? One, because it will distance you from the peers around you. I often want people to believe that they, in fact, have everything they need to succeed. But with moments of stillness, with decisions to untie themselves from the dock of the past baggage, with a sense of setting a North Star to go to shores of new opportunity, carrying with you 4 quarters and not 100 pennies, you're sure to have some choppy seas every now and then, but you're going to survive the trip and the navigation. and you're going to feel more in control of how you respond to what you're doing. And apropos to that sailing analogy, it is true when they say that while you can't adjust the wind, you can't change the direction of the wind, you can adjust the sail. And that's what life is all about, adjusting the sail, the winds of turbulence, of change, and controversy. But the question is, are you wanting to change the sail and keep sailing in spite of the challenges that you face? So with that, let me shift it back to you, Ms. Val, and again, say thank you.
I just love that analogy that we have, and I believe it. The first time I heard it, I just felt like I was walking on clouds when I walked out of our room, our team meeting. And I know that the student athletes felt the same way, that I don't have to go read another book to feel full, to be full and have everything that I need to live a joyful, grateful, fulfilling life. And like you said, I mean, we were never guaranteed that life was going to be easy, ever. In fact, guaranteed just the opposite.
That's right.
But to be able to know that I have everything in me to get through
the
hard times was just very, very reassuring. And I love that analogy that I've asked you every single time I think we have a meeting, I ask you to share that.
Well, the last thing I want to say, and one way you can really take a proof of this is I often leave audiences, I have told many times your teams, that whole light bulb experience when somebody goes, now I get it. Oh yeah. They have that, what we call the light bulb moment. Well, in your room right now, if you cut the lights off and it's dark and you cut it back on and it's light, and cut it off and on, it's light and dark. When you finally leave the light on and I ask you, well, why is there light now in your room? The number one answer, albeit wrong answer, is that, well, you flipped the switch up. The second answer, albeit wrong, is, well, there's electricity. And while both of those behaviors and phenomena are accurate, there's only one reason there's light now in the room, because that light bulb was already in the socket. Because if I had the light bulb out of the socket, but flip the switch up and we can verify electricity, you're still going to be in the dark. So when a light bulb comes on, it must mean that you were pre-wired with the genius in the first place. You just never turned on the light or positioned yourself to discover the genius and talent that you innately possess.
You got that, Bruins? Got that? We're all brilliant.
All of you.
Shine and make the world a better place. Dr. Parham, we've ran out of time, but if somebody would like to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, I teach at Loyola Marymount University. My email is william.parham@lmu.edu. Feel free to give me a call and email and ask a question or pose whatever, and we'll set up some time to talk and chat.
Great. It's william.parham, Parham, at lmu.edu. All right. Dr. P, thank you so much. Bruins, thank you so much for engaging, for your chats, for your questions. Can't wait to see you again. Remember, we're all filled up with greatness and beauty. Feel it, own it, and then share it with the world. Good night.
Amen. Thank you, Ms. Val, and thank you, everybody. Make this the best year you've ever had. Until next time, I'm out.
Yeah. Thank you.